Thank you. Yes, I mean, as Tom says, the notion of fossilization is one that's fairly well established in our profession. You often hear teachers talking about their students saying that Paco is really fossilized, although my B2 students have got lots of fossilized errors. And in fact, if you go online, you'll see lots of websites which deal with fossilization in one form or the other. So this is Betty Azar, the author of best-selling grammar, is talking about fossilization. This is in Spanish websites for L. Spanish is a second language, foreign language, so you'll find the same thing. So the concept kind of interests me for a number of points of view. And I'm going to be shamelessly autobiographical again and talk about my own experience. And this is the kind of schema that I've prepared and I hope we'll get through in the next 55 minutes. So the autobiographical bit first. I arrived, this is the kind of background, I arrived in Spain aged 36 for the first time. I arrived in Spain since 1986 and I had very little Spanish and a terrible dress sense. The dress sense has improved. I had very little Spanish. I went to classes that were provided by the organisation that I was working for. They were fine. They didn't entirely address what I perceived as my immediate needs as a new arrival in the Spanish-speaking country. We did, dare I say it, a lot of grammar. And we practiced sentences, none of which I can remember except one from an early class, and that was El payaso hace reír a la gente. El payaso hace reír a la gente. I think it was a kind of in the context of what people, different jobs do. And I kind of remember thinking, well, that's kind of something I remember from those classes. I then found a student of mine who wanted to practice an intercambio. So we did half an hour Spanish, half an hour English after classes, and that was really useful. Not least because he was kind of interested in the things that I was interested in. Unfortunately, he outstripped his English developed much more rapidly than my Spanish, and there was no longer a need for him to continue doing this. And of course, he was much younger. I was, as I say, 36. They say that cognitive decay sets in around about the age of 41. So I had a very narrow margin, if you think of it. I also was working in an English language school. Most of my colleagues were English language speakers. My partner was an English language speaker. I wasn't going out every night, hanging out in bars and things with other Spanish speakers like the generation beneath me or before me was doing or had done. So people who arrived in Spain aged 20, 21 or whatever were fluent by now, either in Spanish or Catalan. They arrived in Barcelona. I hadn't had that kind of advantage. I was not sort of socialized. And so I was coming from behind, if you like. And despite getting a comfortable level eventually to be able to address my basic needs, I was pretty well, I sort of plateaued out to the point that taking me out of my comfort zone into an area like, buying an apartment or whatever, or going to the dentist or whatever, I was seriously deficient in the vocabulary apart from anything else. Also, working against me was the fact that I had been seriously influenced by this man. Do you recognize him? I think he was here a couple of years ago. This is Stephen Crash, and I had a serious, almost chronic case of crashinitis. I believed firmly that you learn languages through receiving comprehensible input. You don't have to learn the grammar, you don't have to practice anything, that you just wait. If you're exposed to meaningful messages, so magically the whole acquisition process would kick in. So I was listening to meaningful messages, I watched television, I listened to the radio, I read the newspaper, went to the movies, I even attempted to read some fiction. And every morning I would wake up thinking, today's the day. I'll be speaking today, it has to be today. I've been here 6 months. I mean, the silent period just can't go on forever. And I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and nothing happened. Nothing happened. Stephen? Well, I could take out a writ against him for holding up my... But it was true, I did believe that. And I did go to classes, I did attempt to do a little bit that was more proactive than simply... of course, he would argue that I wasn't getting comprehensible input. The input was pitched too high, which was possibly true. When I was attempting to... I was going to Pedro Almodovar movies in my first year. And I was like the man in the Charles Addams cartoon. The only person in the audience is laughing, everybody else is... I was the only person in the audience who wasn't laughing. Because I couldn't understand a word they were saying. But I was trying. And I was getting a lot of exposure, even if it wasn't necessarily meaningful. But essentially, in lay terms at least, my Spanish had kind of bottomed out. It had fossilized. I mean, it didn't seem to get any better. Proof of this was very recently I ran into the son of the portero of the apartment that we were living in. And when we arrived, he was only 12. He was only 12. And I ran into him recently in the street. He's 40. And we started speaking, and he immediately burst out laughing. He said, "God, Scott," he said in Spanish, "your Spanish is as bad as it was when I remember when I was 12. I said, "Thank you, Paco. That's really, really kind of you." So I was getting quite a lot of messages, and of course, this is doubly humiliating, because if I was any Joe Bloggs, it wouldn't matter so much that my Spanish was pretty lousy. But the fact was, I'm a teacher trainer. I train teachers to teach second languages. One would think that I would know how to learn a second language. So every day I would go in and telling people the latest from the news on SLA and blah, blah, blah. And my students, they think he's an imposter. He doesn't know what he's talking about, just listen to Spanish. So it's a huge kind of cross I was bearing. And every New Year's Eve, I would make the resolution, this year I'm going to do it. I'm going to quit smoking and I'm going to learn Spanish. I quit smoking. So let's look at this concept of fossilization. Let's quickly review the literature. I mean, it was first mooted, the term, and after all, it's a kind of metaphor, because we're not talking, obviously, about fossilization in any literal sense. But in 1972, Seliger noted that most L2 learners fail to reach target language competence. We know that. There's no news. Most of them. That is, they stop learning while their internalized rule system contains rules different from those of the target system. The system locks down before it has reached the target light level. This is a quotation from Rod Ellis, I mentioned yesterday. He goes on to say, though, Rod Ellis does, it remains a controversial construct, with some researchers arguing there is never a complete cessation of learning. Now, I draw comfort from that last sentence. There is never a complete cessation of learning. There is hope. It is not terminal. Well, we'll see. Some of the case histories that have been used by researchers into second language acquisition, which have touched on the area of fossilization, include a very early study done in the 1970s of a Costa Rican immigrant to the United States called, entre comillas, Alberto. And Alberto's English had famously stopped at a very, very basic level. And the researcher concluded, after working with him over a period of 10 months, that it was effectively not remedial. The researcher tried to teach him negation and present simple in English, and he still came out at the end of the period still saying things like, "I know like fish," or "I know drink beer," kind of thing. So, and the researcher concluded the reason why, fairly obviously, he was not integrated. into an English-speaking community. He relied on his peers, on his family, etc., who were all Spanish speakers. So he was not, in the research of John Schumann's terms, acculturated. He hadn't been acculturated into an English discourse community. However, in a sense, contradicting that hypothesis that it was all about acculturation, a study not long after of a Japanese immigrant into the United States, adult, 33-year-old, called Wes in the literature, who showed all signs of being very acculturated. He was an artist, he lived in Hawaii, he had lots of American friends, he worked with Americans, he sold paintings to Americans. He was using English on a fairly regular basis, but his English was not that much better than Alberto's when you looked at it on paper. However, it seemed that he had, and this is a researcher who studied him, Dick Schmidt, who wrote recently, reflecting on that study, he was asked, well, why is it that people think, and people did think, that Wes was reasonably articulate, reasonably fluent. Particularly after about a 3-year period, the 3 years of the study, he seemed to be very communicative, even though his grammar had effectively not changed substantially. And so the researcher, thinking back on this study, says, why do people think his English is so good when he doesn't use prepositions, articles, plurals, and tenses? I think it's because when people talk to him and listen to him, they don't notice that he doesn't use them. He somehow, it's what's sometimes called perceptive fluency. It's the perception of fluency, even if when you look at it closely, it's incredibly inaccurate. But people on the street don't really notice. The only people who ranked his English as being poor were teachers, English teachers. But otherwise, they were very happy with him. And it's interesting when you asked him, or when Dick Schmidt asked him about what he knew about grammar, he would answer things like, so Dick Schmidt would say, what's the difference between paint and painting? Wes? And Wes would say, well, if I go to exhibition, I saw paint, but I'm start painting means I do it, not finish. Dick Schmidt goes, yeah, okay, sort of. So what's the difference between think and thinking? Whereas I am think means now, I'm thinking means later. So it's really fascinating to get into his head. He's got these theories of grammar, but they are kind of, he's self-taught, but he's actually not interested because he knows that he can get away with it. And this is the thing, he said, he asked about, why do you think you can get away? He says, I persist. And I believe it's the people I'm speaking to, it's their job just as much as mine to make sense of what I'm saying, which is really kind of quite bold. It's not just me, it takes two to tango. So that was Wes. So these were early studies in fossilization, as it were, and the point about Wes was that he was acculturated, unlike Alberto, and yet his English had fossilized effectively. So bang goes the acculturation theory. There must be something more to it. And I think part of it is this thing of having a system which is kind of satisfactory for one's needs, and also realizing that perhaps the job of improving or upgrading the system is absolutely enormous. And so coming back to my own case, when I think about Spanish grammar, for example, I made conscious decisions. There were things that I was simply not going to deal with because, hey, it's far too complicated for my purposes. Take, for example, the system of demonstratives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 15! And in English? I mean, hello, come on. Tidy it up. Do you really need all those? And so, what do? You pull the first one off the shelf that comes to your mind. That's what I did, operating on the system. So I would go into a pastry shop and I'd have a conversation like this. Ese pastel allí, tarda allí, que aquí, que lleva crema, sí, que uno de este. But you see, that didn't matter because why? I was pointing. I was using pragmatic competence to make up for the lack of grammatical competence. So that system was never going to get sorted out because there was no need to. I always got the pastry I wanted. So that's one reason I think why I kind of... but it also... researchers subsequently have been questioning the notion of fossilization at all, wondering whether it actually exists or it's testable. Because how long do you have to track somebody before you can say that their system is broken down, or stopped, or frozen. I mean, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 30 years? And they have done studies, and one woman was studied over a 30-year period, and she did seem effectively to have fossilized. But it's a very difficult thing to prove that there is no hope, that it is terminal. And also, we're always talking about grammar. What about vocabulary? Is that fossilized? And what about your first language? Is that fossilized? Or are you continually learning stuff in our first language? Certainly, we're learning vocabulary, new phrasal verbs, stuff like that. So the theory now is that perhaps, while it's a very intuitive notion, fossilization, it's difficult to pin down. And Michael Long reiterates that unambiguous evidence of fossilization is at best scarce. So this is the kind of thing that gives me hope. However, I mean, it is intuitive. We know in other skills and things that we do that we often reach a level of kind of competence, which we know is okay, but it's not virtuoso. I mean, if you're a musician or a sportsman or whatever, you maybe have decided that you could probably get better, that you don't push yourself. It's what one writer called, I'll just go back to that. It's what, Rod Ellis, now backtrack, you prefers the term stabilization rather than fossilization, because we tend to stabilize, but it's not, that doesn't have the negative connotation of being permanent. And if you think of it, we talk often about the plateau, the intermediate plateau. Is this forever, or is it simply a period which inevitably all learners go through? And as I was saying, we do it, we get to that plateau in other skills. A writer who, a journalist in New York, who describes it as what he calls the okay plateau. It's when we're as good as we need to be at the task, and we basically run on autopilot. And he said, a lot of our things that we do in daily life are at the okay plateau, including memory. But he says about trying to train his memory to perform amazing feats, such that he actually won a competition in New York. And he did it by starting again. And I think because one of the ways that you move off that plateau is that you've got to, in a sense, de-automatize the process. So if you are an average guitar player, it may be, to be a better one, you may have to kind of literally unpick all the kind of routines that you're used to doing, start again. This is what he did, supposedly, with memory training. So this is the kind of background. I want to look now, what happened then? About 2 years ago, I woke up one morning and said, this is it, I can't stand it any longer. I've been humiliated now for 25 years. That conversation with the portier's son was just too much. I have to do something. I have to get my credibility back. So I decided to set about and devote time to improving. And the first thing, the logical thing, was to go back to school. I decided to treat it as a kind of action research experiment. See, is it possible to defossilize that after so long? By treating it as an experiment, I needed to have a benchmark. I needed to know what my level was to start with, so I could compare it at the end. Now, I did enroll in a language school, and I did an online test. It was mainly grammar, and I came out amazingly as C1 on their thing. I was thinking, that's something wrong with their test, because I don't feel C1. But then I discovered an online test. Well, no, it's a telephone test. It's marketed by a major publisher, but it was designed by a guy who was working with big data. I was mentioning that yesterday, and designed a test of several languages, including Spanish, which you can do on the telephone. It's called the Versant test. Have you heard of it? And I saw a presentation about it at a conference in Japan or something, and I was kind of impressed. Wow, you could test. And the guy who was presenting it was Japanese himself, and he said, yes, it's amazing, it's assessed his English fairly accurately. So what you do is you phone up, you've got to pay $25, you phone up, and they give you a series, and it's all automated, there's no human intervention at all. It's all done by algorithms. And there's about 6 tests, or exercises that you have to do. One is just simply repeating sentences that you hear. Another one is they give you some sentences out of order. You hear them and you have to put them back in order. Another is a vocabulary one where they ask you what's the opposite of various things. Another one, the final one of the 6, is where you have to speak for 2 minutes about a subject where they tell you, yeah, and pretty predictable, my family, my work, and that sort of stuff. And then it is calibrated according to 4 scales. So you get a printout, like within 5 minutes you get this. You get a printout, you get a level. So my score was something like 61 overall out of 80. And then you get a score for sentence mastery, which is really the nearest thing to grammar or syntax and thing, vocabulary, fluency, and pronunciation. And you can choose, incidentally, which form of Spanish you want to be measured on, whether it's Peninsular Spanish or Latin American Spanish. So that's it. And then you get little descriptors. So to show more clearly, this is what I got overall, 61. 61 out of 80. I mean, that's not bad. And look what I'm good at. Sentence mastery, the grammar, amazingly. And look what I'm bad at. Now, that did not surprise me for a second, because it's the fluency that I really, really lacked. And pronunciation surprised me, because I had terrible, I can hear it myself, terrible gringo accent. Just like in the movies. So that was the starting point. That's the diagnostic. The next thing, I had to go back to school. Now, as I said, I couldn't just see one. When push comes to shove, language organizations always have problems with people at the far end of each thing. I was too high. I didn't have a class. I only had one other student C1. So they said, would you like to go into B2? And I said, yes, please. That's much more my level. And we got into the B2 class, and here I am with my classmates, some of them. I noticed we were much, much younger than I was. No cognitive decay there. And a random mixture of nationalities and different levels of Spanish, noticeably, and some people had been living there, and some people who had just arrived, etc. Great fun being back in a language class, I have to say. The teachers were fabulous. I had 3. It was an intensive course, let me emphasize that. 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, 20 hours a week, 2 weeks. So we had a range of teachers, because no teacher can teach 4 hours at a go. They were all experienced, very experienced. They were all native speakers, whether that mattered or not, I don't know. They were all women, and they were not all Spanish women. One was an Argentinian. They were fabulous. They were really, really, they knew their stuff. When any problem came up with grammar, they would leap to their feet and give me, a 10-minute explanation, or give us a 10-minute explanation. They really were on top of. And they were kind of generous with their feedback too, and they didn't pull punches. We got feedback, which is what I really needed, actually. I wanted to be corrected. I wanted feedback, because this is what I wasn't getting when I talked to my friends in a bar or a cafe. So I really got all the se versus esta and the por y para, all the feedback and all the, they were really tough, but gently tough. And what else was good? They also kind of gave us a little bit of wiggle room. After all, if you're teaching a 2-hour class, you can only prepare so much. So when the students start to raise topics of their own, the teachers are going, no, that's okay, you talk. So things were, and of course we tended to subvert the lessons because we wanted to talk. So if there was a grammar exercise with the word dog in, I remember this was an occasion, it's like, does your dog bark or something? And she would say, so anybody got a dog? And I said, no, but my neighbors have, and it drives me crazy. And I would launch off onto one of my long soliloquies, while the other students got out their phones and started texting. Because I got a reputation for talking too much. But I needed to, because I wanted to, because I wanted the opportunity, because it's so safe in a classroom when you get the feedback. The downside was that we had, dare I say it, course books. We had course books. Now the course, when I first arrived, I enrolled in the Escuela Oficial in Barcelona, and I got put into a class again much higher than my level. Partly because I got inside the test. I could work out what was being tested here. It was all about exceptions, not rules, and so I kind of wormed my way up into the 3rd level of the 5-level thing, and we were being taught the subjunctive. that was it was the subjunctive, the whole of the course. And I didn't need the subjunctive, I needed a much more basis. Well, lo and behold, I get into this with the course. What's the grammar? The subjunctive. What's the Spanish obsession with the subjunctive? Not only that, I was there for 2 weeks, and they did a unit of a course book a week. So effectively, 1 unit of a course book was on television. A whole week on television. I don't watch television. I don't have anything to say about television. And the second one was on cities. Well, yeah, okay, I've got something to say about cities. But I mean, a whole week on one topic? Well, that was because they were constrained by the book. The inspiration was that one of the teachers, when we were doing the cities unit, said, okay, this week you have to prepare a presentation about a city that you know. And this is the city I chose. For what reason, do you think? I was born there, yes. And we did a presentation, and we had to prepare it, and a little PowerPoint. And you sat up all night looking up words like boiling mud, and geysers, and fumaroles, and things like that, because that's what they have in Rotorua. And it was fantastic. I prepared that presentation like I prepared my normal presentations, but con ganas, because I really wanted to get it right. And then we did the presentations, and there were other students sitting around, and I did presentations, and the teacher took feedback, and then we had question and answer, and the students actually really interested in Rotorua. And it was fantastic. It was good for what I do anyway, but I was doing it in Spanish. What she didn't do, unfortunately, having given us feedback, each of us, she didn't give us the chance to do it again. I think that was a pity, because once you've got the feedback, you want to try and integrate it into the thing. I think the teachers probably were thinking, everyone's going to get bored seeing Scott talk about Rotorua again. But you could give a task to the rest and say, let's see him do it again, see if he can integrate all these points that I just gave him. But I really think that repetition of the task is incredibly important. So one of the things that I really enjoyed about the classes for me was the chance to be communicative within the safety of the classroom. No risk. Not like outside the classroom, people will laugh at you. No. It was like a kind of, and I concluded what a class is good for. This is in the blog, incidentally. I kept a blog while I was doing this. I'll give you the link later. They're good places for incidental. We learned so much incidentally that wasn't the subjunctive, because it was stuff that just came up in the discussions. And classrooms are even better places to rehearse, experiment, take risks, and get at the point of need support. That is to say, when you make an error or you can't find the word, there's somebody there who will give it to you. And this was fantastic. So I came away from those classes just oozing Spanish. I remember I was coming home from one of the classes and I saw a friend of mine on the other side of the street, and near where I live, Spanish-speaking, Catalana, and I crossed the street to talk to her. Now, before I would have crossed the street not to talk to her. And I started babbling away, and she thought, what have you been taking? So I like that. I see the image of a climbing frame, a safe place in which to... So the problem is I couldn't stay in the classes for ever. 2 weeks out of my life was just already too much. I had to maintain the Spanish outside of the class. How was I going to do it? And the other thing was I realized more than ever that without testing myself, that the changes, the improvements, well, fluency were good, but they were tiny, minuscule really in my overall knowledge of the language. I'd learned a few more words, I was perhaps better at the subjunctive, I knew the difference between por and para, perhaps a little bit more clearly. But I mean, I was going to have to put in a massive amount of time if I was going to get anywhere beyond this playground level. So I needed to rethink what my goals were, my objectives. And it occurred to me that I'm too old. I'm never going to get Spanish like a native speaker. I'm not even going to get Spanish like from my next door neighbor who just, who's 20 years younger than me and has been there only 2 years, but is so much better a learner. I'm going to have to think in terms of lowering the bar and I decided what I wanted to achieve was not mastery of Spanish per se, but mastery of my Spanish. I wanted my Spanish to be better, to be more fluent, to be more accurate. My Spanish. Just my little Spanish. That is the Spanish that fulfills my communicative needs. So if you think of it, Spanish, I mean, it's a sort of nesting circle. There's all Spanish. It's spoken in all Spanish-speaking countries in the world. And then there's standard Spanish that is described in grammars. And then there's pedagogical Spanish, the Spanish we teach, or Spanish teachers teach. And then nested within all that is my little Spanish, without the subjunctive probably, but nevertheless. And maybe it's not really there, it's over here. Because a lot of it's non-standard, in fact. But it's okay. It's the Spanish I speak, and it's as good as it'll get. I just want it to be a little bit better. So I want a miniaturized version of the whole of Spanish that will serve my purposes. So I also needed to rethink what it is that I wanted to do. What is my Spanish? What do I want to do with it? Really, seriously, that I can't do now. And one of the things that I'm often asked to do is to give talks to Spanish teachers in Spanish, and I always say no. No puedo. No. I would just be, especially Spanish teachers. I mean, imagine how critical they would be. So but I have friends who are not native speakers of Spanish, and they do this, and I'm so envious. So I needed to this seemed to be something that could be achievable if I thought about it and worked at it hard enough. And it fits into the theory of motivational theory, because motivation, in a sense, is probably what I lacked. I needed a theory of motivation which would best help me in this quest. And the theory of motivation is the one of the L2 self. I think you may be familiar with this. If we imagine ourselves as an L2 speaker, as a second language speaker, what is the self we want to be? Do we want to be the life and soul of the party, going around cracking jokes in Spanish and everybody thinking, oh God, he's so amazing, blah, blah, blah. Or maybe not. Maybe do we want to be the scholar in Spanish who's able to read Spanish and understand and listen to Spanish, etc., but maybe not want to speak it. Now, and the idea, if you visualize yourself as the kind of Spanish speaker you want to be, and then you look at the discrepancy, the distance between you and that is kind of what draws you along to try and to narrow that discrepancy, that distance. So this is the Spanish speaker I wanted to be. This is how I am now. This is what I do for my daily bread. And this is what I wanted to be. Exactly the same, but doing it in Spanish. Giving talks. So what do I need to be able to do this? Let's just move on. I needed to develop some strategies for working outside classrooms. Because I needed to develop my own Spanish, first of all, I needed vocabulary. Now, I have been reading Spanish since the day I arrived in Spain. I read this newspaper on a regular basis, and I calculate that I read 5,000 words of Spanish text a day. Now you multiply that by, let's say, 300 days, and that's 1.5 million words of text. 1.5 million words of Spanish text I have been reading in 30 years. There's a massive amount of text. The evidence on the research into extensive reading like this, and it's mostly extensive, I'm not reading every word, I'm not reading intensively, I'm reading often for the gist, is that if you do this and you are understanding the bulk of the words in the text, you will pick up a lot of incidental vocabulary. And this is the figures. You'll go cross-eyed reading this, but this is what they say. If students read approximately 1 million words of running, and I was reading 1.5 million, and they know 96 to 98% of the words. I did a calculation of my familiarity with the words in El País using a sample of 5,000 words and a word list, and I knew 98% of them. So I'm well up there in terms of my familiarity with the vocabulary. Then I will be exposed to 20,000 to 40,000 new words each year. And if I learned only 1 in 10 of those from context, I will have something between 2,000 and 4,000 new words through extensive reading. So now, was this true? I needed to know, what is my vocabulary? So I did a test of vocabulary. You can test your vocabulary size by a very simple method, and it's not totally reliable. But you go through a dictionary, you take every 10th page, and you just tick all the words that you are familiar with. And then you multiply that by the number of pages in the dictionary. Or by, was that right? No, by whatever. Anyway, so what I got was a working vocabulary of 10,000 words. That was my Spanish vocabulary. Now, if this is true, it should have been 50,000. I've been reading 1.5 million words of text for 30 years, and I'd only got 10,000 words. So something was going wrong. Either it was with my reading, or it was my head. I mean, I should have a much better vocabulary than that. And one of the reasons, I think, is that I wasn't paying attention to the words. And almost the reading was too easy. It was too easy. I needed to sort of be pulled up short. I needed to look at words more often and say, hang on, I didn't know that. I needed to look words up in the dictionary. If you look words up in the dictionary, you're putting in a little bit of effort. Chances are that you'll remember them better than if you don't. But I don't like lugging around a dictionary. I do a lot of the reading on the bicycle in the gym. I don't sit there with a dictionary. I mean, how sad is that? So, but now, of course, you can teach yourself vocabulary and have online dictionaries. And do a lot of the work because of the digital tools are available. So this is what I do. I downloaded a program, the Anki program. There's a number of Quizlet, there's a number of there's flashcards that you write yourself, and I decided to make a serious effort at learning vocabulary, but not any vocabulary. I needed the vocabulary. The other problem with the El País, the newspaper, is it's a very narrow register. I wasn't getting the vocabulary I needed to be this talker, the speaker about methodology and language analysis. So I went to a bookshop. I bought about 10 books on teaching methodology, language teaching methodology in Spanish. And I went through them looking for useful expressions and collocations, like this one, la enseñanza comunicativa. And so I'd write, and then I'd test myself. So that was one strategy, which was designed to arrest the fact that my extensive reading hadn't really worked for me. Let's move on. The other thing that I needed to address was, there's one thing to get a receptive vocabulary, but my problem was production, fluency. I was kind of unwilling to communicate. I did not take the initiative. That, for example, I was more like, I was in a kind of psychological state of resisting becoming a second language speaker because of the kind of psychic shock that it would. People have studied this and said that silence, yes, is a very, very symptomatic of the kind of the conflict between two languages. Maybe what I needed was not a language teacher, but a psychiatrist. What I lacked was this thing of willingness to communicate. Willingness to communicate, though, is not just wanting to initiate conversations. It's being in the company of people who want to hear your conversations. That's what's important. And it's interesting, they're going back to Alberto. Remember Alberto, the Costa Rican, and he couldn't, and the reason was supposedly there was not a culture rating. People have gone back to that research and the data more recently and said, we're kind of blaming Alberto, but hang on, what about the culture in which he was in? How receptive were they? How welcoming were they to Alberto? And Bonnie Norton concluded maybe the reason why Alberto's language pigeonized was very simply because the members of the dominant Anglophone community had ambivalent attitudes towards this immigrant called Alberto, offering him limited opportunities to practice English rather than the reverse situation. So, just going back to this quote then, maybe it takes two to tango. It's a reciprocal process. You need to be in the right kind of context. For Wes, for example, the Japanese had this willingness to communicate, and he seemed to have a willing audience. And Dick Schmidt says, again, it seems that Wes's confidence, his willingness to communicate, and especially his persistence in communicating what he had in mind, and understanding what his interlocutors have in their mind, go a long way towards compensating for his grammatical accuracies. Now, how was I going to address this? I needed to find somebody who was willing to listen to me, being willing to communicate. So I went back to the original idea I had of the intercambio, of having a conversational partner. But I was very lucky in that I had a friend who volunteered. This is not us, but this is from a movie that I've always liked. It's set in a restaurant and it's about a conversation. The whole movie is called My Dinner with Andre by Louis Malle, and the whole movie is this conversation. It's completely riveting. And this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to have conversations with somebody who was prepared to listen to me and talk to me. And I was incredibly lucky that a Spanish-speaking friend volunteered to do this. So we met every Tuesday in a bar, and had conversations. All in Spanish. It wasn't intercambio because his English is fluent. So it was all in Spanish, and it went on and on and on. We would talk for hours sometimes, and such to the point that sometimes he would say, I can't remember if we were talking Spanish or English, and I couldn't remember because we were so engrossed in what we were talking about because we shared the same interests. And this is an expression that came up. He taught me, he mentioned, he quoted it by a Spanish writer, which I really kind of summed up because he was such a good listener that I forgot that I was a bad speaker. And the eloquence was in the listener, not in the speaker. And I love that. And the fact that it emerged out of these conversations. And, you look at all the evidence. There's a lot of these self-styled, you go online and look up fluency, how to be fluent in 20 languages. There's hundreds of these people out there now bragging about how clever they are. YouTube videos of them speaking Urdu and Swahili and Arabic and whatever. But there's one who's written a book, and it's kind of interesting because this is a non-specialist. This is something like a self-taught language learner called Benny Lewis. And I kind of think, Benny's onto something when he says that. We keep trying to find language solutions through courses, software, apps, flights abroad, books, schools, and a host of other methods, some of which can be useful, but these are nothing but accessories to the true core of language learning, the people we speak with and hear. And that really resonated with me after this experience with Inigo. Okay, moving on. The test. The test fell in my lap, as it were. I wasn't expecting this, but I'd mentioned on my blog that I would like to be giving talks and things in Spanish. That was my ambition. A friend of mine who runs a language school in Barcelona, where I have given talks in English, sent me an email saying, well, you could do a workshop in Spanish here at Oxford House if you want. We could get a very supportive audience of English teachers and Spanish on school. We could limit the size if you want. We could get some feedback from a Spanish teacher too if you wanted. Now this was like, how am I going to do this? Dare I? And then I thought about my experience with Rotorua and giving the presentation. I was like, with a bit of help from my friends, I can do this. So I said, okay, Duncan, put me down, give me a month, and I'll do it. And I decided to make the theme of the talk fossilization. Because this is a group of teachers, so I'm going to talk about fossilization, talk about my own experience. But do what I'm doing now, but doing it in Spanish. So what I did was, because again, went back to the dictionaries and getting the expressions and practicing. Then I had a very good friend who's a retired teacher of English, who's Spanish, and she rehearsed me. We went through, I sat in her lounge, and she went through, she gave me copious notes. And we did that twice, and then on the day came, and here I am, giving the workshop in Spanish. And there's the audience. El payaso hace reír a la gente. I don't know whether they're laughing at my mistakes or what. Very bad idea to choose fossilization as a subject, of course, and it was because I can never pronounce it in Spanish because fossil is, and then defossil and destabilize. Don't even try me. I kept getting caught these multi-syllable words, but I did it. I walked out of that class and I walked home and I said to myself, I did it. Lo he hecho. I did it, or lo hice, or whatever. I was over the moon, and that was so sweet and understanding, and nobody walked out, and nobody corrected me. It was just fantastic. It was, I could hear myself saying the most awful, but it didn't matter. So, then the real test, of course, to go back to if we think of it as an experiment, the pre-test and the post-test, I need to go back to the telephone and find out if there's any movement on that front. So if you remember, this was my first reading, so 3 months later, doing the same test, but different questions, obviously, because it's all scrambled. This was the result. Okay, so I'll tell it, 61 to 63. It doesn't sound like a lot overall, but actually it pushed me over a barrier into, I think, the C1 or something. What's interesting is that, to me, is that sentence mastery slips, but fluency moves forward. So it's like, it's this thing you can't, in language learning, you can't walk and chew gum at the same time. If you're accurate, you're not going to be fluent. If you're fluent, you're not going to be accurate. But what do I want? I want fluency. And look, A 20% increase in fluency in 3 months. A 20%. The pronunciation too miraculously improved. So what now? Okay, so the question is, what are the implications? What did I learn from this experience? Well, I learned that you need to dominate the language in a way that makes it your own. And I always come back to this quote from the great Henry. You're proficient in language to the extent that you possess it, that you make it your own. Yeah, my Spanish. You bend it to your will, assert yourself to it rather than simply submit to the dictates of its form. In other words, just like, all those, no, I'm not going to bother about that because life's too short. La vida es corta. That's one thing I kind of see to be a lesson to be learned. And the other thing is you never know all of the language. We never know all of the language. We don't even know all of our own language. We always know specific bits and pieces of it. And no one needs all the resources that a language offers. Syllabus designers, testers, read that, think about it. How much do you need to put into a course book, into a syllabus, into a curriculum? Really, seriously, do we need to know about backshift and reported speech ever? Only for the exams. Do we really need the third conditional? Really? Just to recognize it. Do we need a sight vocabulary of 20,000 words or so? We need the bits and pieces, at least, and certainly in the second language. That was the other thing I learned. So I learned that this is what I need to value and not aim for the heavens, as it were. And also we need to stop considering second language learners as always being on this eternal pathway, which they will never really achieve. It's unrealistic. Only some of them will. Few of them will. They should give them a chance if they want to. But really, perfection is never going to be achievable. And they said, another writer went back and looked at Wes's, you remember the Japanese, he concluded that in fact, Dick Schmidt, research was always measuring Wes against a native speaker standard. But in fact, Wes didn't want to be a native speaker. Wes's English was good enough English for his purposes. Wes may be seen as the English speaker he needed to be for his particular social context. I'm the Spanish speaker that I need to be for my particular social context. Not quite. I mean, there's still a lot of room for development, but within that specific local context. So if you think of the map again, I mean, you could say, well, I'm never going to reach the Sima. But the view from the Meseta is quite nice. It's better than from the Colina. I just go back to the nice quote here then. So what's the implication for teaching? That our goal as language educators, as teachers, might be better understood as developing resourceful speakers who can use and develop all the resources that they've got, like Wes could, even if they don't have a fairly fully developed grammar, rather than some vague notion of native content. So just to conclude, here are my takeaway conclusions from that experience. That native-like accuracy is, for most people, adults, I think, is late or never acquired. I'm not saying it's not. And there's a wonderful example sitting in the 6th row of a learner who started learning English at age 15, who you could never tell is not English. That's Lisa. But for most of us, it's going to be a long haul, and we're never going to get to the SEMA, as I said. We need to develop semiotic agility. This is what one guy called Stephen Thorne used this expression at a plenary in IATEFL, and he was talking about these kids who go online and do gaming online visual games, and the whole communities of them. And many of them, or most of them, are not native speakers, but they use English as the kind of lingua franca. And they're talking about a very specific register, these games. And they may not have very much English, but they're incredibly fluent and communicative with each other. And they use all sorts of means, not just words, but pictures and anything. And this is a semiotic agility, the agility to use signs to communicate meaning. Maybe we need to indulge the creative use of error. Don't think of errors as always being errors, but just sometimes think of it as linguistic creativity. Some of the errors that our students make are quite ingenious. We need to interrogate the standards and prescriptions that are handed down to us by standard grammars. You know, is this really necessary to make this distinction between fewer people and less people, for example? For heaven's sake, most native speakers don't make the distinction. We're teaching a lot of stuff that really is just getting in the way of what's really useful. We should celebrate linguistic diversity and use the second language and the first language together in the classroom and encourage and welcome code switching and code meshing. I do this all the time in Spanish because I'm always with friends who speak both Spanish and English, so I slip in and out of the two languages at will. Focus on fluency rather than accuracy, and really importantly, help or encourage learners to realize their L2 self. Yeah? Let them think about it and give them examples of other people who've said, who've got a very clear idea, an achievable idea of what it is that they want to do in English. What is your English-speaking self, and how will you get there? And really work on visualizing it. So that is my story, and you're welcome to read more of it on that blog. That's with the blog. I kept a regular blog, and all the references that I've made here you will find there. And we're practically out of time. So, muchísimas gracias por la atención y los aplausos.